What if I told you that the future we once believed was distant, hypothetical, almost psychedelic speculation, is no longer just approaching, but is quietly unfolding beneath our feet? Sometimes I sit with this strange sense of déjà vu, as if I have stepped into a dream I once described out loud, a landscape shaped by ideas I whispered decades ago. And when I look around now, at the shifting culture, the dissolving boundaries of the mind, the return of plants long forgotten, I can't help but feel that the world has started to rhyme with those old visions. I find myself thinking, was I predicting something, or was I merely remembering a future humanity was destined to rediscover? Because from where I stand, it appears the psychedelic renaissance isn't coming, it's here. I remember saying once that culture is a kind of organism, alive, breathing, evolving, and that it periodically sheds its skin when the old forms become too tight, too brittle to contain what is emerging. Today, everywhere I look, I see pieces of that old skin cracking. People who once mocked psychedelics as childish fantasies now whisper their names with reverence. Institutions that once shunned them are rearranging their entire medical frameworks to accommodate them. And the young, the seekers, the restless minds of our time, they navigate the world not through the rigid narratives of the past, but through questions, curiosity, and direct experience. It feels like the return of something ancient, but with a distinctly modern urgency, as though the species is waking up from a long, uncomfortable sleep and suddenly realizing how far it drifted from itself. I spent years speaking about the archaic revival, that inevitable turning of culture back toward the wisdom of our ancestors, back toward the plants that shaped the earliest human imagination. And now, as I observe the world cracking open, I see that ancient revival shimmering at the edges of our modern life. Not hidden in jungles, not tucked away in esoteric books, but blossoming in clinics, in research labs, in living rooms where microdosing has become as casual as morning coffee. I watched this unfold and I wondered, did we choose this, or were we always being pulled back toward the source? I remember the first time I realized that psilocybin wasn't merely a chemical event, it was a form of communication, something beyond language, something older than human memory. When the mushroom spoke, it didn't offer philosophies or theories, it offered vision, it offered a widening of the perceptual window through which reality could enter. And now scientists, doctors, CEOs, and ordinary seekers are encountering that same widening. They speak of increased neuroplasticity, of dissolving depression, of improved creativity. But beneath their clinical descriptions, I sensed the same tremor. I felt the shock of discovering that the mind was never a closed room, but an open door. Sometimes I watch interviews with modern researchers and I smile because they speak as though they're charting new territory. And in a sense they are. But in another sense, they are simply rediscovering a continent we abandoned long ago. The therapeutic renaissance, the microdosing wave, the billion-dollar investments, these are all signs that humanity is re-entering a conversation it once had with nature, a conversation it tragically silenced. And now, as the silence breaks, something immense is stirring in the collective psyche. I find myself reflecting often on the stoned ape theory, not as a scientific claim carved into stone, but as a poetic gesture toward our evolutionary mystery. The idea that psychedelics played a role in awakening our imagination was never meant to be dogma. It was an invitation to question the narrow story we tell about ourselves. And now, as the world once again embraces these visionary substances, I can't help but wonder if we're witnessing a second evolutionary ignition. Not of biology this time, but of consciousness itself. A species remembering how to dream again, how to imagine, how to step outside the habitual loops of thought that have kept us confined for centuries. There is a strange electricity in the air when a culture is on the verge of transformation. I feel that electricity now. It's subtle, but unmistakable. It whispers in the shifting attitudes of the public, in the scientific papers revealing what shamans knew all along, in the quiet but growing hunger people have for meaning. So many of us move through life feeling a gnawing emptiness, a disconnection from the world, from each other, from ourselves. And when I look at the psychedelic resurgence, I see more than medicine. I see a collective yearning to stitch the torn fabric of the soul back together. But there's another layer to all of this, something more difficult to articulate. It's the sense that consciousness itself is accelerating as though the tempo of existence is rising. Years feel like months, months like days. Technology multiplies at an exponential pace, ideas spread like wildfire. And beneath this frenzy lies a deeper pulse, something ancient yet futuristic, something that resonates with the strange intuitions I once had while contemplating Time Wave Zero. I never insisted on it as literal prophecy, but I did feel that the universe tends toward novelty, that complexity and awareness accelerate as we move toward some unknown horizon, and looking at our world now, with its rapid cultural mutations, its dissolving boundaries, its global psychedelic reawakening, I feel that pulse growing stronger. There are moments in quiet reflection when I wonder, were the psychedelics preparing us for this? For a world where stability dissolves, where meaning shifts, where the old maps no longer describe the new territory. I have always believed that psychedelics weren't just tools, they were teachers. They trained the psyche to navigate chaos, to remain curious in the face of the unknown, to embrace paradox rather than flee from it. And as humanity plunges deeper into uncertainty, ecological, technological, psychological, I sense that these ancient teachers are stepping back onto the stage at exactly the right moment, and yet I cannot ignore the shadow that always accompanies the light. I feel both excitement and caution as I watch the modern world embrace these substances. There is beauty in their return, but there is also danger. When the sacred becomes commercial, when the mystical becomes a marketing strategy, when the ancient wisdom of indigenous peoples becomes stripped of context and repackaged for profit, something essential is lost. I've seen it before, the way culture devours what it cannot understand. And that thought lingers in my mind as I observe this psychedelic renaissance, shimmering with potential yet trembling with the possibility of distortion. Still, despite the complexities, I cannot deny the deeper intuition that something extraordinary is unfolding. It feels as though humanity is stepping into a threshold space, a liminal zone between what we have been and what we might become. And standing in this threshold, I feel a familiar mixture of awe and anticipation, because the question is no longer whether psychedelics will transform the world. The question is whether we are ready for the world they reveal. And so I continue watching this unfolding renaissance with the same mixture of wonder and vigilant curiosity that once guided me through the jungles of the Amazon. The landscape is different now, made not of vines and rivers, but of data, research papers, clinical trials, and digital communities. Yet beneath its modern surface, I can still feel that ancient pulse, the same one that beat in the temples of forgotten civilizations, the same one that hummed through the rituals of shamans who carried these medicines long before the concept of science existed. It moves now through laboratories and legislative chambers, weaving itself into the bloodstream of culture, slowly reshaping the collective psyche in ways we are only beginning to understand. As I observe this cultural metamorphosis, I sense the deep irony that the very society which once condemned these substances is now seeking salvation through them. The same institutions that dismissed consciousness exploration as delusion now proclaim its therapeutic potential. The same culture that declared altered states to be madness now praises their ability to heal trauma, dissolve existential dread, and reconnect fractured identities. I watch this reversal with a quiet recognition, because I have always believed that the taboo against psychedelics was never about danger, it was about power. These molecules dismantle illusions. They reveal the scaffolding of culture. They show us the machinery behind the myth of normality. And perhaps that is why humanity pushed them away for so long. They made the world transparent. Now transparency is returning, not as rebellion, but as necessity. The psychological crises of the modern world have reached such proportions that people are no longer satisfied with comfort or distraction. They want something deeper, something that reorients the soul. Psychedelics offer exactly that, a reconfiguration of perception, a direct encounter with the architecture of the mind. And as I watch thousands of people engaging with these experiences, some gently through microdosing, others through full immersion, I feel that humanity is slowly remembering how to navigate its interior landscape again. There is something profoundly moving about witnessing a species rediscover its inner worlds. Modern life has trained us to externalize everything: progress, meaning, identity, purpose. We built monuments to the outer world and neglected the labyrinth within, yet the labyrinth never disappeared. It simply waited. Now, as people peel back the layers of their conditioning and examine the roots of their suffering, I sense the emergence of a new kind of courage, an inner bravery that does not seek conquest but understanding. Psychedelics catalyze that bravery. They illuminate the corridors of the mind with a strange and ancient light, revealing both the wounds and the wisdom hidden in its depths. I often spoke about the idea that psychedelics dissolve boundaries, and now I see that dissolution occurring on a cultural scale. The boundaries between science and spirituality blur. The gap between the individual and the collective narrows. Even the hard lines between what we call self and what we call world begin to soften. There is an unfolding recognition that consciousness is not a private possession, but a shared field, an interconnected tapestry through which experience flows. And as more people come into contact with this realization, whether through a high-dose session or a carefully measured microdose, the structure of culture subtly begins to shift. People become less rigid, less isolated, less convinced of their separateness. Something like empathy reawakens. Yet even as these transformations sweep through the culture, I feel the weight of the responsibilities that accompany them. The psychedelic experience is not a toy. It is not a consumer product. It is not a quick fix. It is an initiation into a deeper mode of being. And I worry that in our rush to integrate these substances into the mechanisms of modern life, we may forget the reverence they demand. These are ancient teachers dressed in chemical clothing, and they require humility. Without that humility, the experience can fragment rather than heal, overwhelm rather than clarify. I have seen minds open too quickly and crumble under the weight of their own revelations. So I watch this renaissance with both excitement and caution, knowing that every doorway to transformation also leads to the unknown. Still, I cannot deny the sense that something extraordinary is awakening in the collective psyche. It is subtle, like the first light before dawn, but unmistakable. There is a hunger for authenticity, for truth that cannot be packaged or bought. People are no longer satisfied with narratives that reduce life to productivity or material gain. They want meaning that breathes. They want connection that is not transactional. They want a relationship with existence that feels alive. Psychedelics, for many, become a doorway to that aliveness. They reopen the channels of awe, the forgotten sense of wonder that makes reality feel mysterious rather than mechanical. I sense this awakening not only in individuals, but in the cultural atmosphere itself. Art feels different. Conversations feel different. There is a subtle vibration in the collective mood, a feeling that something enormous is just beneath the surface, as if humanity is inhaling before a great exhale. This feeling reminds me of the psychedelic state itself, when the visuals have not yet formed, but you can feel the universe rearranging behind your eyelids, a tension that is not anxiety but anticipation, the sense that every moment is pregnant with potential. Perhaps what we are witnessing is not merely the therapeutic comeback of psychedelics, but the early stages of a deeper evolutionary process. Not evolution in the Darwinian sense, but the evolution of awareness, the shifting of consciousness from a fragmented mode of being to a more unified one. The recognition that the world outside and the world inside are reflections of one another. And as this recognition grows, as it moves from personal revelation to cultural understanding, the way we organize reality will inevitably change. I can feel this shift in the language people use. They speak less about controlling life and more about participating in it. Less about conquering the world and more about aligning with it. Less about individual achievement and more about collective flourishing. It is subtle, but language reveals the direction of consciousness. And right now, that direction points toward integration, toward wholeness, toward a paradigm in which the mind is not a battlefield but a garden. Every great transformation begins quietly, like a seed germinating beneath the soil. And I sense that the psychedelic renaissance is precisely that seed, a slow, underground process that will eventually reshape the landscape of human understanding. But seeds do not grow simply because we desire their fruit. They grow because conditions support their emergence. And right now, humanity is creating those conditions through curiosity, through courage, through a growing willingness to explore the depths of consciousness without fear. As I observe all this, I feel a strange familiarity, as though I am watching a story I once dreamed begin to unfold in waking reality. The future no longer feels like an abstract speculation. It feels like a force reaching toward us, reshaping our minds, our culture, our collective destiny. And as I witness this renaissance continue to expand, I sense that the true transformation has only just begun. And as I continue witnessing this blooming transformation, I feel the unmistakable sensation that something vast is positioning itself behind the ordinary world, as though a hidden architecture is slowly revealing its outlines. The psychedelic renaissance is no longer a fringe phenomenon, no longer an undercurrent flowing beneath culture. It has become a pulse, a rhythm, a kind of collective heartbeat. And the closer I look, the more I sense that this heartbeat is synchronizing people across different continents, ideologies, and generations, They are not uniting around a doctrine or a belief system, but around an experience, an opening, a direct encounter with the deeper layers of reality that were once reserved for mystics, shamans, and ancient dreamers. It fascinates me how effortlessly this renaissance has woven itself into daily life. Once, the psychedelic experience was dramatic, hidden, and intensely taboo. Now it appears in microdoses tucked into wellness routines, in therapy rooms illuminated with soft light, in digital forums where people share their inner revelations with strangers who feel like allies. It has entered the bloodstream of modernity with surprising grace. Not as a rebellion, not as a counterculture storm, but as a quiet, persistent reawakening. And I can feel that this subtlety is its strength. The transformation does not announce itself, it simply spreads. What moves me most is the way people describe their encounters, not with the vocabulary of escapism, but with the vocabulary of reconnection. They speak of remembering themselves, as though they had wandered so far from their inner world that the reunion feels like rediscovering an old friend. They speak of seeing their lives not as burdens but as unfolding stories. They speak of nature not as scenery but as kinship. This shift from separation to connection is the real renaissance. The plants and molecules are simply catalysts. The true revolution occurs in the psyche, and the more I listen to these stories, the more I sense that the collective mind is stretching, expanding, becoming capable of perceiving subtleties it once ignored. People are beginning to notice the invisible threads that link their choices, emotions, relationships, and dreams. They are beginning to understand that the inner world is not a private chamber, but a dimension of reality as vast as the physical cosmos. Psychedelics reveal this effortlessly. They pull back the curtain and show that consciousness is not housed within the skull, but woven into the fabric of existence itself. And when someone sees this even once, something irreversible awakens. There is a kind of responsibility that comes with such awakening, and I can feel that responsibility trembling in the collective atmosphere. When people realize that their thoughts shape their emotional world, when they see that their beliefs sculpt the boundaries of their reality, they begin to treat their minds with more care. They begin to cultivate presence rather than distraction. They begin to notice the subtle patterns that once ran their lives from the shadows. Psychedelics expose those patterns with ruthless clarity, but they also invite the possibility of transformation. They show not only what is broken, but also what can be healed. As this shift unfolds, I sense that humanity is entering a phase where self-awareness will no longer be optional. The world we have created, with its speed, its complexity, its interconnected fragility, demands a deeper kind of psychological maturity. It demands individuals who can remain grounded while navigating uncertainty, individuals who can expand without losing themselves. Psychedelics are not the answer to this challenge, but they are one of the tools through which the psyche learns to stretch. They prepare the mind to hold paradox, to embrace subtlety, to navigate the unknown without collapsing into fear. What fascinates me is how this renaissance is not merely psychological or spiritual. It has profound implications for culture itself. Creativity is mutating. Art is shifting toward more symbolic, more multivalent expressions. Music carries an emotional intelligence that seems almost non-human. Films and literature explore themes once considered esoteric. It is as though the collective imagination is becoming porous to new forms, new ideas, new metaphors. Psychedelics amplify imagination, but they also refine it, turning it into a tool for deeper understanding rather than merely escape. And when millions of imaginations evolve simultaneously, culture transforms. I often return to the idea that the future emerges from imagination long before it appears in physical form. Every structure in society, governments, technologies, philosophies, began as a flicker in someone's mind. And now, as psychedelics reawaken the creative core of the species, I sense that the visions emerging from these altered states will shape the next era of human existence. Not through force, but through inspiration. Not through revolution, but through evolution. The psychedelic renaissance plants seeds in the collective psyche, and those seeds eventually bloom into new ways of living, relating, and understanding. I find myself contemplating the ecological crisis through this lens as well. When someone undergoes a profound psychedelic experience, they rarely return with a sense of human superiority. Instead, they return with humility. They feel the living presence of the earth. They recognize that the planet is not a resource but a relationship. This recognition is not ideological. It is experiential. And an experience is harder to dismiss than an argument. If enough people feel the earth as a living being rather than an inert backdrop, Something fundamental begins to change, values shift, priorities realign, the illusion of human separation begins to dissolve. Psychedelics nudge consciousness toward ecological awareness not by preaching but by revealing. And I feel that this ecological sensitivity is not accidental, it is essential. Humanity cannot move into the next stage of its evolution without repairing its relationship with the planet that sustains it. Psychedelics remind us of this relationship because they reconnect us with the primal intelligence that underlies life itself. They remove the numbing veneer of modernity and expose the raw truth that survival and meaning are intertwined. When the mind expands, the world becomes vivid again. When the world becomes vivid, responsibility naturally follows. What intrigues me most is the way this renaissance is aligning with technological evolution. For decades, technology and spirituality seem to move in opposite directions, one toward complexity, the other toward simplicity. But psychedelics dissolve that duality. They reveal that technology is an extension of human imagination just as mythology once was. And I can feel that the merging of these two domains, inner exploration and technological expansion, marks the beginning of a new form of culture, one that is not purely material or purely mystical, but a synthesis of both, a culture in which consciousness is the core and everything else radiates from it. This synthesis is appearing in surprising places, in the way digital art captures the fluid geometry of the inner world, in the way virtual spaces mimic the malleability of psychedelic vision, in the way biofeedback and meditation technologies allow individuals to witness their own minds in real time. These innovations echo ancient practices while simultaneously pushing the boundaries of what is possible. And I sense that this convergence is not a coincidence. It is a sign that humanity is beginning to integrate the outer and inner worlds into a single continuum. As this integration deepens, a new kind of human identity begins to emerge, not the isolated individual shaped by fear and competition, but the interconnected being shaped by awareness and empathy. I can feel the early vibrations of this identity in the global desire for healing, authenticity, and meaning. It appears in the way people speak about their experiences, not to elevate themselves, but to understand themselves. It appears in the way communities form around shared exploration rather than shared ideology. It appears in the way individuals are beginning to seek not escape from reality, but deeper participation in it. And through all of this, I sense that the true transformation of consciousness is not something that will happen in some distant future. It is already happening in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Each moment of clarity, each insight, each dissolution of fear contributes to the collective awakening. Psychedelics accelerate this process, but they are not its source. The source is deeper. The source is the evolving psyche of the species itself, an ancient intelligence slowly remembering its own nature, rediscovering its own potential, and stepping into a world that is still forming around it. And as this awakening continues to bloom at the edges of the collective mind, I sense the unmistakable truth that we are stepping into a threshold moment in the story of our species, not a moment of sudden revolution, but one of gradual, undeniable transformation, a metamorphosis taking place not in the streets or the halls of power, but deep within the psyche of millions. It dawns on me that culture itself is being reprogrammed from the inside out in small increments, through revelations that ripple quietly through the inner lives of individuals, who then carry those insights back into the world like seeds tucked into their pockets. These seeds germinate in the way a person speaks more gently to their child, or the way they reconsider the direction of their career, or how they begin to treat their relationships as sacred rather than disposable. They germinate in the way people reconnect with their bodies, with their senses, with their intuition. After years of moving through life half asleep, they germinate in the courage someone finds to face their trauma, their grief, their insecurities with honesty rather than avoidance. And in these subtle acts, I watch the architecture of an entire civilization shift so quietly that many will not recognize the change until it surrounds them completely. As this shift unfolds, I feel the presence of something ancient re-entering human awareness, an intelligence older than culture, older than language, older than history itself. Psychedelics, for all their modern scientific framing, are essentially conduits of this intelligence. They reconnect us with the instinctual, the intuitive, the mythic, the biologically encoded wisdom that guided humanity for millennia before rationality took the throne. This does not diminish reason, it simply restores balance. It reunifies the divided self, reuniting mind and spirit, instinct and intellect, presence and purpose. I sense that the modern mind is starving for this reunion. We built a world that rewards efficiency over meaning, knowledge over wisdom, achievement over inner alignment, and yet, beneath that facade of progress, people feel hollow. They feel disconnected. They feel the quiet ache of a life lived on the surface. Psychedelics do not create meaning, but they dissolve the barriers that keep us from perceiving it. They illuminate the terrain of the soul, reminding each of us that life is not meant to be merely survived or optimized. It is meant to be understood, embodied, and consciously lived. In this renaissance, I notice that people are becoming increasingly sensitive to the symbolic dimension of their lives. They see synchronicities not as coincidences, but as subtle dialogues with the universe. They interpret dreams not as neural noise, but as messages from the deeper layers of the psyche. They begin to understand that the mind is not an isolated island, but part of a larger ecosystem of meaning. This shift toward symbolic perception is not regression, it is evolution. It signals the return of a holistic consciousness capable of integrating logic with intuition, science with spirituality, individuality with cosmic participation. I watch this new consciousness take shape in the way people describe their experiences after a journey. They speak as though they briefly stepped outside the timeline of their lives and viewed it from above, a vantage point where everything makes sense, where the seemingly random events and painful detours form a coherent pattern. This bird's eye awareness allows them to return with clarity, with direction, with an embodied sense of purpose that had eluded them for years. It is not that psychedelics give answers, it is that they reveal where we have avoided asking the real questions. This growing clarity radiates outward into the world in ways that are difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. I see it in the rise of communities centered not around belief but around exploration. I see it in the way people seek authenticity in an age of hyper-curated identities. I see it in the hunger for genuine connection in a culture drowning in digital noise. People are beginning to value presence over pretense, depth over distraction, being over performing. The psychedelic experience accelerates this shift because it makes the realness of existence impossible to deny. And yet, as this expanded awareness spreads, I also recognize the shadow that accompanies it, because every expansion of consciousness brings with it the challenge of integration. Psychedelics can open the mind, but they do not automatically steady it. They can dissolve illusions, but they do not instantly replace them with clarity. The inner landscape they reveal is majestic, but it can also be overwhelming. And so I feel the importance of grounding, of integration, of returning from the experience with patience and humility. The journey does not end with insight, it begins there. In this balance between revelation and integration, I sense the emergence of a new cultural role, not the guru, not the shaman, not the authority figure, but the aware participant. The person who navigates their inner world with curiosity, who embraces their shadow without shame, who contributes to the collective without losing themselves in it. This role is decentralized. It does not belong to a single figure or institution. It belongs to anyone who approaches the exploration of consciousness with integrity. And this decentralization is itself a sign that the Renaissance is real. It is not built on charisma but on inner experience, not on hierarchy but on shared humanity. The more I observe this, the more I sense that psychedelics are not merely medicines. They are mirrors. They show us the state of our minds, the architecture of our beliefs, the roots of our suffering, and the dormant potentials we carry. They do not create truth. They reveal it. And the truth they reveal is often far more expansive than the narrow identity we cling to. They show that consciousness is vast, flexible, interconnected, and fundamentally creative. They show that reality is not a fixed structure, but a living process shaped by perception. They show that the self is not a static entity, but a fluid constellation of experiences. As this understanding spreads, I feel the old paradigm tremble. The paradigm that insists consciousness is an accident, that meaning is subjective, that life is purely material, that spirituality is delusion. These assumptions, once treated as unquestionable truths, now feel brittle. They cannot withstand the weight of millions of personal revelations, and slowly they begin to crack. In their place, a new paradigm emerges, not anti-scientific but trans-scientific, not mystical in the old sense but deeply experiential. It recognizes that consciousness is not a byproduct of matter but a fundamental component of existence. This shift does not require persuasion. It unfolds through direct experience, through the quiet certainty that arises when someone encounters a reality more expansive than the one they were taught to believe. This certainty is not dogmatic, it is humble. It does not dismiss science, it enriches it. It does not reject rationality, it contextualizes it. It does not deny the physical world, it reveals its deeper layers. As I feel this paradigm gaining momentum, I sense humanity approaching a crossroads. Not a crisis of destruction, but a crisis of possibility. We stand between two ways of being. One rooted in separation, fear, and control, the other rooted in connection, awareness, and participation. Psychedelics alone will not decide this path, but the consciousness they help awaken may. Because a species that knows itself, truly knows itself, is capable of choosing its future with intention rather than habit. This awareness brings me to the realization that the psychedelic renaissance is not about substances at all. It is about the reawakening of the human spirit, about remembering that consciousness is not a burden but a gift, that existence is not accidental but meaningful, that the universe is not indifferent but participatory. Psychedelics simply open the door. What lies beyond it is the vast, uncharted territory of the human potential. And as I sense the arc of this transformation, stretching from the ancient shamans to the laboratories of the present and into the unknown future, I feel a profound recognition settling into my mind. Humanity is returning to itself, not to the past, but to the deeper layers of its own nature. The psychedelic experience is a catalyst, a guide, a reminder of the forgotten truth that consciousness is the frontier, the mystery, the creative force shaping reality itself. And now, as I stand at the edge of this unfolding horizon, I can feel that the journey is far from over. In fact, it may be only beginning. The Renaissance is not the transformation, but the spark that will ignite it. The real evolution will occur in how we live, how we love, how we create, how we understand the world and one another. It will occur in the choices we make when we recognize that consciousness is not passive but generative, that we are participants in reality, not mere observers of it. In that recognition, something extraordinary is born, a new kind of clarity, a new kind of responsibility, a new kind of freedom. The freedom to shape our lives from the inside out, the freedom to meet the unknown with curiosity rather than fear, the freedom to evolve consciously. And when a species gains that freedom, even for a moment its destiny changes. Perhaps that is the true prophecy, not a prediction of events, but an invitation to awaken, an invitation to step into a deeper relationship with existence, an invitation to participate in the ongoing creation of reality. And as this invitation spreads through the collective mind, carried by revelations, insights, visions, and awakenings, I can feel the momentum of something vast and luminous rising from within humanity itself. The Renaissance is not an era, it is an opening, and we are the ones who must walk through it.